to the not quite election campaign, which kicked off last weekend with this big announcement.
Making it easier for Australians to see a GP for free wherever they live. Yes,
Albo, using $8.5 billion tax dollars in the search for Peter Dutton's weak flank, and helped along by a frontbench attack on his time as Health Minister more than a decade ago.
Doctors at the time voted him the worst health minister in Australian history.
A naked Labor hit job with an ancient and flimsy survey. And over on Sky News, Steve Price had investigated the matter and reckoned this was
the worst lie. I went and checked this out today. You know how they keep saying, oh, Peter Dutton was the worst health minister ever and he was voted the worst health minister. So I was intrigued. Who was doing this voting? So I looked it up.
And what did he find?
It's something called Doctors Magazine. It's got 1,100 readers only, and this is back in 2013. The Guardian reported it, and one doctor, said that Peter Dutton was gullible and the worst health minister in history. That's it.
Steve Price on the cudgels, uncovering the truth behind Labor's smear, which Sky then promoted online. But was the Price right? Let's check that Guardian article. Does the magazine really have just 1,100 readers?
The magazine has a readership of around 20,000.
So where did Price get that 1,100 figure from? Could this be it? So the 1,100 wasn't the magazine's readership, it was the number of respondents to its online poll. And why did he think it was only one doctor? Well, there was one GP quoted in the article saying Dutton was dull and gullible, but many more he believed he was the worst health minister. On Friday night, after we asked Sky some questions, Steve Price appeared on the telly with this mea culpa.
I'm happy to clarify that. Approximately 1,100 people apparently took part in this poll. The readership of the magazine at the time of the poll was around 20,000. Finally, a doctor I quoted did not specifically describe Peter Dutton as the worst ever health minister. Rather, that was the finding of the actual poll.
To be fair to the Sky News host and Peter Dutton, I suppose, we reckon no one should put much stock in online polls like this. Even the guy behind it says it was hardly scientific, with no way to know if the respondents were even doctors. With the election about to be called, you can expect much more of this spin cycle in the weeks ahead.
You are a professional athlete who has represented Australia so proudly on the world stage. How does a rant like this make you feel? Because I'm outraged and I'm not even an athlete.
Hello, I'm Linton Besser. Welcome to Media Watch. And this week, another reminder of just how many buffheads we put in front of microphones in this country. Here's Triple M's Marty Sheargold's considered analysis of our national women's football team.
You know what they remind me of? Year 10 girls. All the infighting and all the friendship issues, and the coach hates me and I hate bloody training and Michelle's being a bitch. Now, I'm sorry to undermine the whole sport, but that's what I think of it, so you can stick it up your ass.
He's all class, isn't he?
So we're playing in the She Believes Cup.
Oh, she believes in what? It better be men!
We're 12 months out from Australia hosting the Women's Asian Cup.
The Asian Cup. I'd rather hammer a nail through the head of my penis than watch that. Got any men's sport?
What a romp at the Triple M studios. But did they realise there were literally people with ears at the other end? One of them, former hockey-roo Rosie Malone, had the pleasure on her way to training.
All I could think about was the young girls sitting in the car with their parents, hearing this.
For reasons obvious to everyone but Marty, the indignation swiftly became a clamour. Football Australia and the Players' Union released statements condemning Sheargold's sermon, while Olympic swimmer Liesl Jones spoke from the heart.
The comments are so hurtful against women's sport. The biggest thing we could ask for is for men to be on our side when it comes to women in sport, because it's always an uphill battle. It is always hard.
About 40 hours after his ill-judged banter, Triple M was in damage control and Sheargold was typing up a feeble apology.
Any comedy, including mine, can miss the mark sometimes, and I can see why people may have taken offence.
Turns out it wasn't an apology, but a resignation. Because when Marty Sheargold's show came around that afternoon, his dulcet tones were nowhere to be heard. With his final sign-off of sorts on the evening news.
It's just announced its presenter Marty Sheargold is abruptly leaving the network.
For years, Sheargold traded on the cheap taunts that some radio executives appear to believe is the formula for success on the FM dial. Whether he's ridiculing women suffering gynecological disease...
God, don't ladies carry on. Jesus Christ, there is no end of it. Honestly. Endometriosis, and this is controversial.
Yes.
No, I'm going to say it. It's controversial.
Yeah.
It's made up.
Or making elegant jibes at the expense of the deaf.
There's about 8 people in Australia that are deaf, and every time I put the news on, there's someone in the corner doing sign language. Honestly, it's like watching the YMCA. It's like the village people have turned up, and they won't be offended. They can't hear this.
Marty Sheargold's bad behaviour is no secret. It's been making headlines for years. But his joke about the Matildas, which went around the world, finally offended enough people to tip the balance. Because, of course, the Matildas' 2023 World Cup semi-final was one of the most watched television programs, sport or otherwise, in Australian history. But here's a question. Are Marty Sheargold's crimes against good taste and common decency really any worse than his compadre over on Kiss FM, the notorious Kyle Sandilands, whose contract reportedly earns him as much as a cool $10 million a year? So perhaps the real metric as to who stays and who goes from our radio waves is not community outrage, but advertising revenue. Now, to a foreign interference scandal that rocked one of Australia's most prestigious universities last year.
Exclusive.
Defence researcher in security fight at uni.
A defence scientist working on sensitive national security research has accused an Australian National University academic with Russian ties of seeking help to procure a government security clearance. The researcher cut ties with the academic after alleging he had sought help to procure a security clearance for his wife.
Yes, Canberra's elite university was left reeling after the damaging page one allegations from an unnamed national security researcher.
The researcher has warned of the potential for foreign interference at the ANU, which collaborates with Australia's defence and intelligence agencies and Chinese institutions.
The next day, news the federal government was now asking questions of ANU. This was important stuff. Authorities had been warning that Australian universities were vulnerable to the influence of nefarious foreign actors, as the Oz reported in a third hard-hitting piece. So what exactly was this foreign interference scandal about? And who was the ANU academic with ties to Russia at the heart of the story? The Australian did not name him, and it's lucky it didn't, because this story should never have been published. Tonight, we're going to examine just how insufficient the newspaper's evidence was for these extraordinary stories, including its central claim, which came from a man the Australian told us was
a defence scientist working on sensitive national security research.
We've established this is he, a 50-year-old man who now goes by the name Lee Cond, but who has changed his name at least 3 times. And we know this because he brought a witness to some of his meetings with the Australian, who told us she was profoundly disappointed the newspaper failed to properly research what Cond had told it, and describing the paper's stories as
horrifying.
We've agreed not to name this woman. Instead, we'll call her Sally. She was Cond's partner. She's also a senior executive and security expert for one of the world's best-known telecommunications companies. Their relationship ended late last year in terrible acrimony. But her account and scores of documents reviewed by Media Watch have revealed a very different picture than that painted by the Australian. Far from sensitive national security research, we understand the topic of Cond's academic study is actually focused on identifying fake profiles on social media. And while he says he's a defence scientist, I think you'll find that is a stretch. An online biography he wrote for the ANU website claimed he's been a government-invited lecturer for the AFP's Australian Centre to Counter Child Exploitation and Britain's electronic spy agency GCHQ, as well as a senior researcher for the NATO Strategic Communications Centre of Excellence. Here's what those agencies have to say about that.
GCHQ has no record of this individual.
This person has never been a government-invited lecturer.
The person does not work for NATO Strategic Communications.
While he has delivered talks at events held by the Australian Defence Force and the Swedish Defence University, he's now scrubbed from his profile claims he was a visiting lecturer at both. Earlier this year, Cond swore an affidavit in which he claimed his career in national security had spanned more than 20 years. The reality is far less impressive. As recently as last year, he was working in an Apple store in Brisbane. In fact, his sole university qualification, as best we can determine, is in graphoanalysis, a pseudoscience linking psychology to handwriting. So why did Cond make these allegations about this unnamed ANU academic? Well, the academic happened to be Cond's PhD supervisor, who Sally says had been agitating to see Cond's work. Problem was, Sally says Cond had very little to show him, and that's why he went on the warpath.
I witnessed him go on the attack, emailing many people in ANU with allegations that his supervisor was somehow a national security concern with Russian links.
Cond then sought out a willing publisher.
I sat in 3 face-to-face meetings with the Australian's reporter and Cond, where he repeated these allegations to her, which he knew to be false, and I believed she would investigate and reveal the truth about Cond, and that he was making allegations like this with zero evidence.
The PhD supervisor and ANU itself did try to warn the Australian that it was wrong, to no avail. Instead, the paper went ahead with the story and printed his denials, including that his wife did not need a security clearance. So, what gave the Australian the confidence to go ahead? One key document on which it relied was this email exchange between the PhD supervisor and Cond.
If you know anyone hiring experienced software test analysts in Canberra, my wife, who is here now, is looking. APS requires security clearance only available to Australian citizens, so nobody wants to talk to her, New Zealand citizen.
To which Cond responded,
I think I have someone that can help get your partner a baseline security clearance. How quickly do you need it for?
Get that? It was Cond who offered to help with a security clearance. If this was the Australian's smoking gun, I despair, because it is thin evidence indeed. As for Cond, he is standing by his claim to be one of Australia's leading national security researchers. He says our claims are groundless, he denies wrongdoing and says he didn't misrepresent himself. But we've now confirmed ASIO has assured the university that there was nothing in Cond's claims of foreign interference and national security danger to warrant concern, which leaves ANU merely processing a routine inquiry into the grievances of a disgruntled student. And we think it might all wrap up pretty quickly once ANU gets a gander at this next document. A text message from Cond boasting he'd gone on the attack against his PhD supervisor with the help of the Australian.
I immediately cut him off the moment he began annoying me, and it made the front page of the national #1 newspaper in fucking Australia. I didn't wait for him to do criminal things or to do anything highly serious. I told you I'm going to fuck his ass, and I did immediately.
This is actually the second time Cond has been awarded entry into a PhD program, but there seems to be a pattern. Because in 2023, he'd also clashed with his superiors at QUT and the CSIRO after his academic progress was criticised and his scholarship placed under formal review, leading him to withdraw his enrolment. The Australian was not the first to be taken in by Cond, and whatever we now know about him, it had promised to protect his identity in return for information. Unfortunately for the Australian, none of that can take away from the fact it didn't do its homework into its source's backstory and motivations, which should have prompted solemn concern about what he was urging the paper to print. Even now, despite us laying out much of this detail to the Australian last week, it has declined to comment, which I find astonishing. It hasn't defended its reporting, and nor has it issued a correction or a clarification. There certainly has been no apology to the man whose career it could have derailed with this piece of shabby journalism. And that's all from us tonight. Be sure to check us out on iView as well as X, YouTube and Facebook. You can find full statements on our website, and don't forget to send us your tips. See you next week.